The Vethani were older than anything humans could imagine. For 60 million years, they had floated through space in their massive crystal ships, watching as stars were born and died. Their bodies looked like living diamonds, tall and beautiful, with light dancing inside them like trapped rainbows. They had seen everything the galaxy had to offer, or so they thought. On a quiet Tuesday morning, if you could call it morning, in the endless darkness of space, their sensors picked up something. New radio waves were bouncing around a small spiral arm of the galaxy that they rarely bothered to check. The signals were weak and messy. Like a child trying to whistle for the first time, Captain Bradley Webb sat in the communication center of Earth's first deep space station, completely unaware that his morning transmission test was about to change everything. He was just running through the daily broadcast checklist, sending out humanity's basic introduction message into the void. The message was simple and hopeful, talking about who humans were, where they lived, and their dream of meeting other life among the stars. "This is Captain Bradley Webb of the Terran Deep Space Initiative." His voice traveled through space at the speed of light. "We are humans from the planet Earth. We come in peace and friendship, hoping to learn about the wonderful universe we share, thousands of light years away." Elder Thane received this message while floating in his meditation chamber. Thane was ancient, even by Vethani standards. He had been alive when their species first learned to travel between stars. He had watched civilizations rise up from nothing, build incredible cities that touched the clouds, create art that could make you cry, and then disappear completely, as if they had never existed at all. When the human message played through his chamber, Thane felt something he had not experienced in a very long time, curiosity mixed with sadness. These humans sounded so young and eager, like children on their first day of school. Their technology was incredibly basic compared to what the Vethani could do. Their bodies were soft and breakable, living for barely 100 years before dying. Most species like this never made it past their first 1,000 years before they destroyed themselves with wars or used up all their resources. Thane called together the High Council, a group of the oldest and wisest Vethani. They gathered in the great crystal chamber that sat at the heart of their largest ship. The chamber was beautiful beyond description, with walls that showed the history of every species they had ever encountered. Millions of faces looked down at them, some familiar, many forgotten. "We have received contact from a new species," Thane announced, his voice echoing like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "They call themselves humans. They are very young, very fragile, and very hopeful." The other council members listened as the human message played again. Some of them sighed with the weight of knowing what would probably happen. They had heard messages like this before, from species that were now just names in their vast library of the dead. "Their star system shows signs of pollution and conflict," reported Elder Vex, who specialized in studying younger civilizations. "Their weapons could destroy their world several times over. They fight among themselves over resources and beliefs. The patterns are familiar." "How long do you estimate?" asked Elder Zara, the council's record keeper. "Perhaps 500 years, maybe 1,000, if they are lucky," Vex replied sadly. "They show promise, but they also show the same destructive tendencies we have observed in 97% of species at their development level." Despite this grim prediction, protocol was protocol. The Vethani had rules about contacting new species, rules that had been carefully developed over millions of years of experience. First contact had to be handled delicately. Too much too soon could destroy a young civilization. Too little could leave them feeling ignored and abandoned. But there was something different about this human transmission that Thane could not quite identify. Maybe it was the warmth in Captain Webb's voice, or the simple honesty of their message. Most species' first interstellar communications were either demands for attention or desperate cries for help. The humans seemed genuinely excited about the possibility of making friends. "We will make contact," Thane decided. Standard first contact protocols. We observe, we learn, we prepare to document another brief chapter in the galaxy's long story. Captain Webb had no idea that his simple morning transmission had reached anyone, let alone beings who had been alive since before humans discovered fire. 3 months after first contact, Ambassador Diana Ross found herself standing in the airlock of humanity's most advanced spacecraft, staring at something that looked like a floating crystal palace. The Vethany mothership stretched for miles, in every direction, its surfaces catching and reflecting starlight in ways that made her eyes water. Her small human vessel looked like a tiny rowboat next to an ocean liner. Diana had been chosen to lead this historic meeting because she was known for staying calm under pressure. She had negotiated peace treaties between warring nations and handled diplomatic crises that could have started wars. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her hands were shaking as she checked her translation device one more time. Captain Bradley Webb stood beside her, along with Dr. Robert Parker, their team's anthropologist, and Lieutenant Helen Clark, their communications specialist. They were the first humans who would ever speak face-to-face with an alien species. The weight of representing all of humanity pressed down on their shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Remember," Diana whispered to her team as the airlock began to cycle open, "we're not just ambassadors today. We're the voice of every person who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered if we're alone." The crystalline corridor that greeted them was unlike anything they had ever imagined. The walls seemed to be made of living light, pulsing gently with colors that had no names in any human language. Their footsteps echoed strangely, creating musical notes that harmonized with each other in ways that made the hair on their arms stand up. Elder Thane waited for them in a chamber so vast that they could barely see the ceiling. He stood nearly 12 feet tall, his body made of what looked like perfectly clear diamond filled with swirling galaxies of light. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, deep and resonant like thunder rolling across distant mountains. "Welcome, humans of Earth," Thane said. And somehow, they could understand him perfectly through their translation devices. "I am Elder Thane of the Vethany Council. I have existed since before your son was born from cosmic dust." Diana stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Elder Thane. We are honored beyond words to be here." Other Vethani began to materialize around the chamber, their crystal bodies catching and throwing light in dizzying patterns. Each one was ancient beyond human comprehension, having lived through the rise and fall of entire galactic civilizations. "We have called you here to understand your species," Thane continued, his glowing eyes studying the small group of humans. "In our 60 million years of existence, we have watched over 10,000 intelligent civilizations develop. We have seen species that could manipulate matter with their thoughts, beings who could travel through time itself, and empires that spanned entire galactic clusters." The chamber fell silent, except for the gentle humming of the crystal walls. Diana felt like an ant trying to have a conversation with a mountain. "All of them," Thane said slowly, "eventually fell to war, greed, environmental destruction, or simple entropy. Their remains are cataloged in our archives, memories of what once was and can never be again. So I ask you this, young humans, what makes your species believe it will endure where all others have failed?" Diana had prepared for this question. Every diplomat and scientist on Earth had debated how to answer it. They had crafted responses about human ingenuity, about their ability to adapt and overcome challenges, about their dreams of exploring the universe. But standing there in that vast chamber, surrounded by beings older than human civilization itself, all those prepared answers seemed hollow and foolish. Instead, she felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she looked up at this ancient creature who had watched so many hopes and dreams turn to dust. "We don't," she said quietly, her voice barely audible in the enormous space. "We don't believe we'll endure forever. We know we're probably going to make the same mistakes that all those other species made." The Vethany stirred, clearly not expecting this answer. Diana stepped closer to Elder Thane, no longer caring about diplomatic protocol. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point isn't how long we last, but how much we care while we're here. She paused, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Elder Thane, I can't imagine what it must have been like for you. 60 million years of watching civilizations bloom and die, of being the only constant in a universe of change. You must have been so incredibly lonely. The chamber fell completely silent. In all their eons of existence, no species had ever offered the Vethani sympathy. They had been feared, worshipped, respected, and ignored, but never pitied. We're sorry, Diana continued, her voice growing stronger. We're sorry you've had to carry all those memories alone. We're sorry you've had to watch so much beauty disappear. We're sorry that no one has ever thought to ask if you're okay. Dr. Parker stepped forward then, pulling out a small device that projected holographic images. Elder Thane, we'd like to share something with you. These are our stories, but not the ones you might expect. 6 months after first contact, something extraordinary began happening throughout Vethani space. Human ships were arriving regularly now, but they weren't coming with demands for advanced technology or requests for protection from cosmic threats. Instead, they brought cargo holds filled with things the ancient crystalline beings had never encountered before. The first gift that truly puzzled the Vethani was music. Captain Trevor Wilson had brought along his grandmother's old piano, somehow managing to fit it into his ship's cramped quarters. When he played Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in the Great Crystal Chamber, something magical happened. The Vethani's bodies began to resonate with the music, their crystalline forms humming in perfect harmony with each note. Elder Thane later described it as feeling like his soul was singing for the first time in millions of years. We had forgotten, Thane told the human delegation afterward, his voice filled with wonder. That sound could be more than just communication. Your music makes our very essence vibrate with joy. Soon, more humans arrived with different kinds of gifts. Artist Rebecca Lane brought paintings that captured single moments in time, a child's first steps, an elderly couple holding hands as they watched a sunset, a mother's face as she held her newborn baby. The Vethani, who had always focused on the grand sweep of cosmic history, found themselves mesmerized by these tiny slices of mortal life. How do you find such beauty in moments that last mere seconds? Asked Elder Vex, staring at a painting of morning dew on flower petals. Rebecca smiled and touched the ancient being's crystal arm gently. Because that's all we have, Elder Vex. Seconds, and minutes, and hours. We have to find beauty in them, or we'd go crazy thinking about how short our lives are. But perhaps the most revolutionary concept the humans brought was something they called chosen family. Dr. Patricia Thompson, a historian from Cambridge University, spent countless hours with Elder Lyra, the Vethani's keeper of memories. Lyra had been alive longer than any other being in known space, and her job was to remember every civilization that had ever existed. Tell me about the Karathi, Patricia asked one day, settling into her chair beside the ancient crystal being. She had learned to recognize the sadness in Lyra's glowing eyes when certain names came up. Lyra's form dimmed slightly as she accessed memories that were 20 million years old. They were peaceful beings who lived on a world of floating islands. They communicated through color changes in their skin and loved their children more than life itself. As Lyra spoke, Patricia could see the story unfolding in the crystal walls around them, images of beautiful blue beings with skin that shifted like aurora, children playing among floating gardens, families gathering to watch the triple sunset that painted their sky in incredible colors every evening. When their son began to die, Lyra continued, we offered to relocate them, but they refused to leave their ancestral islands. The parents formed circles around their young ones and sang their death songs as the solar wind swept across their world. Patricia felt tears streaming down her face. What were their names, Lyra? The children, what were their names? Their names? Lyra seemed confused. I remember their songs, their customs, their art, but individual names. We don't usually, ... Please, Patricia whispered. They deserve to be remembered as individuals, not just as a species that died. Every parent who held their child that final night, every child who trusted their parents to keep them safe, they all had names. They all mattered. For the first time in her endless existence, Lyra felt something crack inside her crystalline heart. She began accessing memory files she had never explored before, diving deeper than she ever had into the personal records of the Karathi. Velinara, she said softly. There was a little one named Velinara who painted butterflies on the walls of her family's floating home, and Kethamo, who always asked too many questions during sunset prayers. Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. We'll remember them too. All of them. Tell me their names, and I'll make sure they're written down in our books. I'll make sure human children learn about Velinara, who painted butterflies, and Kethamo, who asked questions. This simple act of remembering individual lives, rather than just civilizations, sent shockwaves through Vethany society. For millions of years, they had been cosmic historians, cataloging the rise and fall of species. But they had never grieved for individuals, never celebrated single lives, never understood that each person who lived and died was a universe unto themselves. Meanwhile, in other parts of the Vethany fleet, different kinds of connections were forming. Lieutenant Benjamin Clark, a young soldier from Texas, had somehow ended up spending his free time with Vethany younglings beings, who were only a few thousand years old and still learning their people's ways. Watch this, Ben said, pulling out a simple rubber ball. He bounced it off the crystal floor and caught it. It's called catch. You throw it to someone, and they throw it back. The young Vethany were fascinated. They had never played games before. Their education focused entirely on preparing them for their future roles as cosmic observers. But something about the simple joy of throwing and catching appealed to them in ways their elders couldn't understand. Admiral Catherine Walsh, a decorated military officer, found herself sharing war stories with Elder Corvain, the Vethany's greatest battle strategist. But instead of discussing tactics and weapons, they talked about the weight of command, the responsibility of making decisions that affected other lives, and the strange bonds that form between soldiers who face danger together. You know what's funny? Catherine said one evening, as they watched stars being born in a nearby nebula. We humans fight all the time, but we also forgive each other all the time. We hold grudges, and then we let them go. We make enemies, and then we make them into friends. Corvain's crystal form pulsed with curiosity. This seems ... inefficient. Catherine laughed. Maybe, but it also means we never run out of second chances. What amazed the Vethany most was how the humans treated them. They didn't bow down in worship or beg for technological gifts. They didn't fear the ancient beings or try to impress them with false bravado. Instead, they simply cared about them as individuals. The emergency alert came through the Vethany communication systems at exactly 14:27, Galactic Standard Time on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. The message was short and terrifying. The star that warmed New Plymouth, humanity's most distant colony, was about to collapse. The stellar core had become unstable, and within 72 hours, the entire system would be consumed by a supernova explosion that would wipe out everything within 50 light-years. Elder Thane received the alert while meditating in his private chamber. His crystalline form immediately shifted from its peaceful blue glow to the urgent red that indicated extreme concern. New Plymouth was home to nearly 40,000 humans, farmers, scientists, teachers, children who had been born under that doomed star and had never seen Earth. Thane immediately contacted the Vethany fleet's fastest evacuation ships. With their advanced technology, they could transport every single human to safety within 60 hours. It would be close, but entirely possible. He had overseen similar evacuations before, with other species. The procedure was well established. Arrive, explain the situation, load everyone onto transport ships, and relocate them to a safer world. What Thane didn't expect was the response he received when he contacted Colonel Daniel Hayes, New Plymouth's colony leader. "Thank you for the warning, Elder Thane," Hayes said through the communication link, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We appreciate your offer to evacuate us, we really do, but we're going to have to decline." Thane's form flickered with confusion. "Colonel Hayes, perhaps you don't understand the severity of the situation. Your star will explode in less than 3 days. Everything in this system will be completely destroyed. There will be nothing left, not even atoms." "We understand," Hayes replied quietly. "We're not staying because we don't believe you, or because we think we can survive it. We're staying because this is our home." "But it's just a planet," Elder Vex interjected, joining the conversation. "There are thousands of suitable worlds we could relocate you to. Some are even more beautiful than New Plymouth, with better soil and more stable weather patterns." Hayes was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Elder Vex, can I tell you about my daughter Lucy? She died 3 years ago in a farming accident. She was only 7 years old, and she loved to collect the purple flowers that grow near the eastern mountains. We buried her under the big oak tree behind our house, and I visit her grave every morning." Thane listened with growing bewilderment. As Hayes continued, "My wife Margaret is buried next to her. She died last year from a disease that your medical technology probably could have cured easily. But she chose to die here, on the world where Lucy was buried, because she said she couldn't bear the thought of leaving our daughter alone." Hayes paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Elder Thane, I know this probably sounds crazy to beings who live forever, but our families are here. Not just Margaret and Lucy, but my parents, Margaret's parents, her brother who died in that shuttle crash 5 years ago, and hundreds of other people we loved." Dr. Rachel Green, New Plymouth's chief medical officer, joined the conversation from the colony's main hospital. "Elders, I think there's something about human nature that might be hard for your people to understand. You see death as an ending, as a failure or a tragedy, to be avoided at all costs, is it not?" asked Elder Lyra, who had been listening silently. Rachel smiled sadly. "For us, death is part of the story, not the end of it. When we bury someone we love, we're not just putting their body in the ground. We're making a promise that they'll never be forgotten, that the place where they rest will always be sacred to us." She gestured toward the window of her office, where the cemetery could be seen in the distance. "Those graves aren't just piles of bones and decaying matter. They're promises we made to love completely, even knowing it would hurt to lose them. They're proof that these people existed, that they mattered, that their lives had meaning." Teacher William Brooks, who ran the colony's only school, added his voice to the conversation. "My students' great-grandparents are buried here. The kids visit those graves and hear stories about what those people were like, what they accomplished, what they dreamed about. If we leave, all of that becomes just stories. But here, it's real. It's connected to the ground they walk on." Elder Thane felt something stirring in his ancient consciousness that he couldn't quite identify. "But surely, preserving your lives is more important than preserving graves. The dead are gone. You are still alive." "Are they gone, though?" asked Hayes. "When I sit by Lucy's grave and tell her about my day. When I see her smile in the face of every child who plays in the fields she used to run through. When I smell those purple flowers she loved and remember how she'd bring me bouquets every morning. Is she really gone?" As the hours ticked by and the star's condition worsened, more colonists joined the conversation. Each had their own reasons for wanting to stay, but they all centered around the same theme: their connection to the people they'd lost, and their unwillingness to abandon those connections, even in the face of certain death. We know you could. Save us, said Farmer Thomas Wilson, whose 3 sons were buried in the colony's cemetery. We know you have ships that could take us anywhere in the galaxy. But we also know that if we leave, we'll spend the rest of our lives feeling like we abandoned our families when they needed us most. The Vethani, who had spent 60 million years observing the universe with detached scientific curiosity, found themselves witnessing something they had never seen before, an entire civilization, choosing to die rather than break the bonds that connected them to their loved ones. As the final hours approached and the star began showing visible signs of instability, the humans of New Plymouth didn't panic or beg for rescue. Instead, they gathered in their town square, sharing stories about the people they'd buried, singing songs their grandparents had taught them, and holding each other close as they prepared to join the ones they'd loved and lost. Watching this display of absolute loyalty to love itself, something awakened in the Vethani that they thought had died millions of years ago. The willingness to risk everything for something more precious than survival. Elder Thane floated in his meditation chamber, watching the readings from New Plymouth's dying star grow more desperate by the hour. For 60 million years, the Vethani had followed one sacred rule above all others: observe, but never interfere. They were witnesses to the galaxy's story, not participants in it. They recorded the rise and fall of civilizations with the same detached interest that humans might watch clouds form and dissolve in the sky. But something had changed inside Thane's crystalline heart as he listened to the humans explain why they would rather die than abandon their dead. For the first time in his impossibly long existence, he understood what it meant to truly care about someone else's pain. Elder Thane, came the voice of his second-in-command. Elder Corvain, the stellar collapse has accelerated. The humans have perhaps 18 hours remaining. Thane's form pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. Deep purples of grief mixed with brilliant golds of determination. Corvain gathered the fleet commanders. We're going to break protocol. The emergency council meeting that followed would be remembered as the most important gathering in Vethani history. Every elder who had served on the High Council for the past 1,000,000 years materialized in the great crystal chamber. The debate that erupted shook the very foundations of their ancient ship. You're talking about abandoning everything our people have stood for since the beginning of time, Elder Vex argued, his form blazing with angry reds. We are observers, not gods. We don't play favorites with primitive species. But they're not just another primitive species anymore, are they? Thane replied, his voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber walls sing. When was the last time any of us felt truly alive? When did we last care about something more than our duty to record and catalog? Elder Lyra, keeper of memories, stepped forward. Her ancient form was softer than the others, filled with the gentle blues of deep sadness. I have carried the stories of 10,000 dead civilizations in my memory banks. I have watched species achieve impossible beauty and then destroy themselves with equal creativity. But never, in all my eons of existence, have I met beings who grieved for strangers they never knew. She gestured toward the communication array that was still receiving transmissions from New Plymouth. The human historian, Patricia Thompson, stays awake at night, memorizing the names of Karathi children who died 20 million years ago. She weeps for beings whose dust has long since merged with cosmic background radiation. When did anyone ever weep for the forgotten dead before? They're teaching us how to love, added Elder Zara, the council's youngest member at only 10 million years old. Not the abstract concept of love that we study in other species, but the real thing. The messy, painful, beautiful reality of caring. So much about someone that you'd risk everything to protect them. The debate continued for hours while New Plymouth's star grew more unstable. Finally, Elder Thane called for silence. His form had shifted to a brilliant white that filled the entire chamber with gentle light. My fellow Vethani, he said, we have spent 60 million years watching the universe unfold while remaining apart from it. We have been the galaxy's memory keepers, its historians, its eternal observers, but we have never been its participants. He paused, accessing memories of his conversations with Captain Bradley Webb, Ambassador Diana Ross, and all the humans who had somehow managed to touch his ancient heart. These humans have shown us something we thought was impossible. They have shown us that even beings as old and distant as ourselves can still learn to feel, to hope, to love. They have made us part of their chosen family without asking for anything in return, except our friendship. Thane's form began to pulse with determination. I say, it's time we chose them back. The vote was closer than anyone had expected, but when the final tally was announced, the decision was clear. For the first time in their species' history, the Vethani would intervene to save a civilization, not because it was their duty, but because they loved the beings they were saving. The Vethani fleet moved with purpose and power that hadn't been seen since the early days of their civilization. Massive crystal ships that had been dormant for millions of years awakened and joined the rescue mission. Technology that had been reserved for theoretical study was deployed in ways that bent the laws of physics. They didn't try to evacuate New Plymouth. Instead, they did something far more difficult and dangerous. They saved the star itself, using gravitational manipulators and quantum stabilizers that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The Vethani fleet surrounded the dying star and began the delicate process of rebalancing its core. On New Plymouth, Colonel Daniel Hayes watched in amazement as artificial auroras began dancing across the sky. The ground beneath his feet, which had been shaking with seismic activity for days, slowly grew still. The star that should have killed them all began to burn steady and bright once again. Elder Thane, Hayes said through the communication link, his voice breaking with emotion. Why did you risk everything to save us? Thane's response came not just to Hayes, but was broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy and every Vethani ship in their ancient fleet. Because you taught us that family isn't something you're born into, Thane said, his voice carrying the harmonics of pure joy. Family is something you choose, and we choose you. The celebration that followed lasted for weeks. Human ships arrived from across their territory, bringing supplies and volunteers to help repair the damage New Plymouth had suffered during its star's near-death experience. But more importantly, they brought stories, music, art, and laughter, all the things that made life worth living. Captain Bradley Webb, now an old man whose hair had gone completely white during his years of diplomatic service, stood beside Elder Thane on the observation deck of the great crystal ship. The two beings who had first made contact years ago looked out at New Plymouth's restored star together. You saved us, Webb said quietly. Not just the people on New Plymouth, but all of us. You showed us that we're not alone in the universe. After all, Thane's crystalline form glowed with warm golden light. You saved us too, my friend. You saved us from an eternity of loneliness we didn't even realize we were carrying. From that day forward, everything changed. The Vethani began adding human stories to their memory vaults, but not as historical records to be filed away and forgotten. Instead, they treated them as family memories, precious moments to be treasured and shared with future generations. Human children learned Vethani songs that were older than their solar system. Vethani younglings played human games and learned about concepts like birthdays, friendship bracelets, and bedtime stories. Scientists from both species worked together on projects that neither could have imagined alone. Most importantly, the Vethani were no longer alone in the vastness of space. They had found something they never knew they were looking for, a family that chose to love them not because they were ancient and powerful, but simply because they were worth loving. And across the galaxy, whenever humans looked up at the stars, they knew they were looking toward home, toward the crystal ships, where their chosen family waited with arms wide open and hearts full of love.